Hey, what's going on, my fellow idiots? Welcome back to another episode of Idiot Proof Cooking. So today I am making steak and Guinness pie. It's a one-pan recipe. It's a pot pie. You cook it in a cast iron skillet, you throw a pie crust on top, you bake it, and there you go. You got steak and Guinness pie. Super easy. Now, last year sometime, I made an episode on chicken pot pie, and I made the bold statement that I prefer my pot pies to have a bottom crust, then you throw your fillings in, and then a top crust. And you know what? I do stand by that. That is how I prefer my pot pies. But I did want to try and make one similar to that, where you just did the top crust. You see a lot of videos on YouTube, other cooks just do that, because it is simpler at the end of the day. Now, what I did for this is I used a puff pastry. I bought the puff pastry. I figured I would make my own puff pastry for its own video in the future because it is pretty tricky, not idiot proof at all, so it kind of warrants having its own video. So I just used the puff pastry to make a top crust, and I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I think you'll really like it as well. So you know what, let's just get into making this steak and Guinness pie. I think you're really gonna like it. Alright, my fellow idiots, our journey with steak and Guinness pie starts off with some chuck steak, much like the ones I have here. I've got about 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds of it, and all I'm going to do is cut the chuck steak up into little bite-sized pieces. I am going to cut off some of the outside fat, like some of the hard fat, and I would suggest you do the same, because there's a lot of fat in between the chuck steak, but some of the outside pieces, like some of the thicker pieces, are a bit egregious. So all we're going to do is cut them up into bite-sized pieces, and then I'm going to sprinkle all of the chuck steak cubes with a bit of kosher salt, a few twists of freshly ground black pepper, and then some all-purpose flour, a couple tablespoons of it. The all-purpose flour will help brown up the cubes when you're searing them. From there, just get your hands in and start mixing this all together until the little cubes are combined, and then head into the kitchen to start searing them. Now, I've got a 10-inch cast iron pan here that I've been heating up with a little bit of avocado oil in it, and it's time to sear these pieces of chuck steak. So all I'm going to do is throw in, 6, 7, 8 pieces at a time. You don't want to overload your pan. And all we're going to do is fry them for 45 seconds to a minute per side. It's not going to take them long to sear because they are pretty small, and we're not looking to cook them all the way through. They're obviously going to cook more as you stew all of this. So just flip them all after you've seared them on the one side, and you're going to have a nice little sear on them. Look at the color on those. Once they have seared on both sides, take them out and repeat the process. Just throw a little bit more oil down if you need, and then sear 8 to 10 more pieces of chuck steak until you run out of chuck steak. So there we go, just taking it all out, and it's time to move on. Those look gorgeous. Look at those. Alright, I'm just going to throw a little bit of olive oil into my pan here first, and then it's time to add in some vegetables, starting off with a large red onion diced up pretty finely, and then I'm going to add in some carrots. I diced up 2 medium-sized carrots, still finely, but not like super small, and then last but not least, some celery. 2 stalks of celery, again, diced them up pretty small, and then I'm just going to fry these for the next 6 to 7 minutes, and then, I realized I was supposed to add in mushrooms. I'm going to add in some white mushrooms, so I'm a little bit behind the 8 ball on the mushrooms. Add in, as many mushrooms as you want, but then fry everything together for 6, 7 minutes. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw some kosher salt specifically over the mushrooms as best as I can, because I'm kind of, like I said, behind the 8 ball. I didn't add them in right away, and the salt is going to coax the mushrooms to release a lot of their moisture. Mushrooms have a ton of moisture in them. So fry this all together for 6, 7, 8 minutes until your vegetables are nice and cooked and super fragrant. They smell awesome. Alright, we're going to add in some garlic now, specifically 4 cloves of freshly crushed garlic. So crush your garlic into your vegetables. Don't forget to scrape your mincer so that you get all of that extra garlic, and then just mix your garlic in with all of your vegetables and let it cook for 45 seconds to a minute. It really doesn't take garlic that long to cook. And then we're going to add in some tomato paste. Now, I'm adding in about 1.5 tablespoons. Anywhere between 1.5 and 2 tablespoons should be fine. I was at the bottom of my tube, so I only had enough for 1.5 tablespoons. But mix the tomato paste in and then just let it fry for the next 3 to 4 minutes to let it cook and caramelize a little bit. Next in is 1.5 cups of beef stock. Use homemade if you have it, or the box stuff will be fine. And then we're going to add in the Guinness. It is called steak and Guinness pie after all, so get yourself a large can of Guinness and pour in 3/4 of the can of Guinness. The only reason why I would say don't pour in the whole can of Guinness is because if you leave 1/4 of it, you get a little bit to drink for yourself. And then I'm going to add in a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce, mix all of the liquids in with all of the vegetables, and then it's time to add in some spice. So I'm going to first add in a tablespoon of dried thyme. I'm going to add in a teaspoon of dried rosemary. Next in is some bay leaves, 3 or 4 of them. I'm still not convinced they do anything. And then I'm going to mix all the spice in, and it's pretty straightforward from here. All we're going to do is take our steak cubes, drop them back into the liquid. We're going to just make sure that they're all nice and covered in the liquid, nestle them in, and then we're going to let this simmer for the next hour and a half or so. You want a lot of the liquid to evaporate. This is going to thicken up a lot on you over the next hour, hour and a half, much like this. Look at how gorgeous that is. Now all we're going to do to thicken it up a little bit more is add in a couple tablespoons of cornstarch with hot water. I'd say about 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. Mix that in and then just let it simmer for another 5-6 minutes so that it thickens up nicely. And then it's time to add the pie crust on top. So I've got my puff pastry here. I rolled it up in my rolling pin, and I'm just going to very carefully drape it over my cast iron pan. Very carefully, you don't want to rip it. There we go, looking good. And then I'm just going to cut off the excess puff pastry with a paring knife here. As you can see, I did rip it a tiny little bit. Oh well, what are you going to do? I'm then just going to press the puff pastry down on top of the pie filling and cut some vents into the puff pastry with my knife. You can make it look decorative, or you could just wildly stab at the puff pastry and make vents, whatever floats your boat. And then last but not least, I'm going to give the puff pastry an egg wash with just 1 egg yolk in all. From there, preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit and bake this for 15 to 20 minutes until the puff pastry comes out nice and puffy and golden brown, looking much like this. Oh my goodness, that is gorgeous. Now a little bit of the filling came up over, bubbled up over, and I don't care. It smells amazing. So let's get in and taste test this. I did let it cool down for like 5-6 minutes. Not too much, but you want to let it cool down a little bit. So here we go. Got myself out a piece. I cut the actual pie with a spoon, believe it or not. It worked out pretty nicely. But this smells amazing, and let me give you a close-up shot. Look at how gorgeous that is. Oh man, you know what, the puff pastry was super easy. You can just buy it at any store. It's way more idiot proof than trying to make it yourself, I gotta be honest. And here we go, taste test time. Let's get a piece with the steak and the puff pastry, and what do I think? It was so good. So good. The steak was just nice and tender and flavorful. The vegetables were rich. Everything was so hearty. The puff pastry was perfect. I mean, hey, it was store-bought, but you know what? Like I said, way easier than making it yourself. Overall, this was a super hearty and delicious dish. I love steak and Guinness pie. The Guinness really brings a flavor to it. Like, it's really its own unique hearty flavor, and it's awesome. I think you'll really like this if you try it at home. So with that in mind, let's call it there. Let's call it an episode. It was a lot of fun making this, and I hope you enjoyed what you saw here today. If you did, why don't you drop me a comment, like the video, or even subscribe to the channel. Thanks again for watching Idiot Proof Cooking, and we'll see you again soon.